All right, the other problem I wanted to go through in the quiz that we didn't get enough time to discuss was this problem 6, which was the one that had the majority of the points on the quiz, because it's really important that you understand these things and to make sure you get these. So I'm going to go through this again. So this is a create table statement for our order table. So again, if we were actually wanting to put data like this into a real relational database, we have to create this create table statement to put that in. And when we put the create table statement in, we list the column names that we want to create, what type of data goes in those columns, and then we list any constraints that we want. And by now, I hope you're getting this in your brain that those constraints are there to help us in the future, because they're going to limit what can go in those columns. And that's good because we want to make sure that people only put valid data into columns. When we have bad data that gets into our database, we have lots of problems, like customers who order something and then it never appears, or customers who order something and we accidentally ship them 3 of it instead of 1, something like that. So we don't want bad data getting in our database. We want to limit that as much as possible. That's what constraints are about. So we set up our constraints on our different columns. And we can either set up a constraint like we did here, where it's listed right in the line where we're defining the column. That's called an inline constraint. Or we can wait till we've gotten through all of our columns, defining which columns we want, and then at the very end, we can just list them here. They're called external constraints, where then you come in and just write a constraint that could apply to any of the columns up above, or even more than one sometimes. So this was our create table statement. And before I go through the answers to this again, even though I know we went through them, I want you to stop and think. These are the important things to know before you really jump in and just fill in these blanks. So if you look at that table here, this is a table where we're recording information about customers who place orders and the employees that they talk to when they place those orders, right? So this is always important to just know generally what the table is even for, what the database is for, before you start answering questions. So if you look at this, we should get some sense about what this is doing, right? So we're saying that we've got some particular order number. That's just a unique number given to every order. We've got the date that order was placed. We've got the customer who placed the order. And then we've got the employee that took the call from the customer. And you may look down here at these blanks and say, well, wait a second, we're missing some information. And that could be true, or it could be totally okay that we don't have something there, because maybe a customer placed an order and they didn't actually end up talking to an employee when they did that. Maybe they placed it online or something like that. So maybe there's some cases where customers don't talk to employees or go through employees to place orders. So that could be missing, or that could be valid. We would just have to know whether or not that was something that was allowed in our particular company. And then we'd have to take that into account, where if this can be blank, if it's okay for that to be blank, because sometimes customers place orders without talking to employees, then we got to make sure that we allow null values in here. So we would never put a not null constraint on a column where it's okay to leave things empty. So that's kind of, again, looking at the table, what it's even about. Then I want you to think about a question here, a couple questions. One is, is there something in here, is there some column in here that has to be unique? Right? Which of the columns in here have to have unique values in every row? Or kind of the opposite question is, which columns can we allow to have repeated values, multiple rows with the same value? So think about that. And then number 2, which of these columns reference columns in other tables, have a match to a column in the other table? So think about that for just a second. If you need to even pause the video, do that, and then I'll discuss the answer to that. Okay, so which rows must be unique? Well, all 3 of these are not, right? Because order date, it just so happens that I think the data that somebody put in here, they all are on unique dates, but they wouldn't have to be, right? You can Certainly you can have multiple orders on the same day, so we need to allow the same thing to be repeated. If there are 10 different orders on January 23rd, we need to allow 10 different rows to have that value. So that is not going to be a unique column, something that has unique values in it. Okay. What about customer number? No, we wouldn't want that to remain unique, or then only one customer, or a customer can only place one order, right? And we don't want that. We can even see there's 2 rows, same customer placed 2 orders. Same thing here. We don't want to limit that to be unique, because then we could only put in a particular employee in here once. And we don't want to do that because employees are taking many, many orders. So let's see, we had again this one and this one are the exact same because that employee took orders from multiple customers. So none of those should be unique. None of those should be columns that require unique values in all the rows. This one, on the other hand, has to be unique. Okay, if that's an order number, the whole point of usually creating something like some unique ID for something is that then it is unique, and we can differentiate one order from another. So even if there happened to be, for example, let's just take this first row. If this same customer placed 2 different orders with the same employee on the same date, maybe they did one in the morning and one in the afternoon or something like that, those are 2 different orders, and we need to be able to keep them apart. If we didn't have this column over here, we'd have 2 rows with 123, this customer number and this employee number, and there'd be no way to know which one was which. We need to get something in the table that distinguishes them. And that's where we have an order number, and we would just give 2 different order numbers to those 2 rows. So this is the one that has to be unique. And then the other question I asked is, which of these columns reference other tables? And hopefully you're getting good at this by now, because this is the whole point of relational databases. You have information in one table refers to information in another table. They match up. And we already kind of talked about this, but let's just go through it again. So this is where we have customer number, that value. Okay, that by itself doesn't mean much to us, but that references a value in another table that has all the information. So we can easily, if we go in and look at our orders that have been placed, and we say, oh, now what's this order that was placed on February 19th? Who placed that? Well, it was that customer number. Who are they? Follow that up here, and we find out that's Ron Thompson in this place in Washington, and get his address and things like that to send the information to him. So if we look up the order and we want to know where do we send it, we go to this table up here, look that up. Same thing for this column, except it references the employee table, right? So we want to know which employee took this particular order. We can look up their ID, follow it to the other table, and find that particular ID right there, and it was Joe Jenkins. If I looked at the right one, yeah. So that kind of answers those 2 questions. So now that brings up the related questions correspond with when we're creating this table. So based upon what we said had to be unique, which one of these would probably be most likely the primary key? And based upon which columns we said refer to other tables, which ones would have a good constraint, should have a constraint for a referential integrity type of constraint. So go through this again. I know you already answered this, but it's good practice to see if it's really sinking in, and think again about what you would put in these columns. So of those 4 values, what would you put here, what would you put here, and what would you put here? So again, if you need to, pause the video, and then I'll go through the answer. All right, so we know that our primary key has to be this column, right? So the order number is our primary key because that's the column that has to have unique values. So this constraint down here that we're setting on order number, that's the constraint where we choose primary key. Right, so we're really dealing with 3 different columns we're putting constraints on. This one, order date, this one, order number, this one, customer number. So we just have to figure out which one goes with which. That one is the primary key, so we would put primary key here, so that's A. Okay, this one down here, let's jump up. Yeah, let's go to that one, I guess, next. So customer number, what kind of constraint would we want to put on customer number? Well, we already know we don't want it to be unique. Okay, and we know that we don't want it to be a primary key. Right? Primary key is the one that has to be unique, so that's the order number, which we already set. So which one makes sense for this? Well, if you said not null, that would mean that you have to have a customer number for an order. And that may make sense. Okay, so putting a not null constraint on the customer number table very well could make sense because we probably need to know when somebody places an order which customer it is. It wouldn't make sense to not have a customer. But if you look at the rest of this line that I gave you here, the key here is that it says it references this customer table. So whenever you see references, that tells you that you're looking at one of these situations where you're referencing another table and you're dealing with foreign keys. So foreign key, again, is something where you're saying this is a column that references a value in another column. So we need to make sure that the data that we reference is actually there. Okay, that makes sense. So we're putting a constraint of a foreign key on the customer number column. And once again, that just means that this column references, it says references this other table customer, and this particular column, whoops, put the wrong thing in here, sorry. I just added this because it was missing on the quiz, added the wrong thing. So it references the customer table, and it references the same column name in the other table. So this column references that column, as we've already discussed. And the reason why we put this particular foreign key constraint on here, we don't have to do it, but a reason it's a good idea to do it. Once again, we can't put a customer number in this table that doesn't exist up here. I cannot come in and add a row that says customer number ABC or whatever, D123, place some order, because there is no customer D123, and that would be bad. If we put a customer number down here, and then we went to ship out this particular product, the order, and we went up to look to where to ship it to, we'd say we didn't record who actually, placed that order. So we got to make sure anything that's down here matches something up here. That's what that foreign key constraint does, and that's what's related to that very last question again. If we delete something up here, if we went to delete this row, now we'd have a problem because there's an order down here that references that guy. And if we delete that row, now that foreign key constraint is going to kick in your database. If we have this foreign key constraint, your database is going to say, no, sorry, you can't erase that row because there's an order that relates to it. Once we get rid of this row, if we ever got rid of this order, then it's fine to delete this. If we have that row in there, your database is going to say, sorry, you can't delete the row up there. If we didn't put the foreign key constraint on here, the database wouldn't enforce that. And then we'd have a problem. We come down, we delete a row here. We come up here, we delete that row, and then the database wouldn't complain because it didn't know that was a foreign key, and then we'd have a problem. So that one is foreign key. And then that brings us to this one here. And this is where, once again, you wouldn't have to put this constraint on here, but you could. And that's which of these would make the most sense, unique or not null for the date. Well, we know that the date certainly doesn't have to be unique, right? Once again, you could have multiple orders on the same day. So the only one that makes sense here to fit in is not null. So of the choices you were given, not null was the only option. So the question is, does that make, would we have to have that? Well, it just depends. Does your order have to have an order date, or do you allow some people to place orders without recording the date? Probably most companies would want to always record the date that the order was actually placed. So if that would be the case, where you're going to say you can't put information in this table without having the order date, okay, then it would make sense to put that not null down here. So for this particular question, that was the only one you could choose because none of the rest made sense. So you had to choose not null. And most likely, if you actually had a table like this, you actually would put a not null constraint on this. So last thing I'll say about this, I've been talking a lot here, but this and this, again, the things that come right after the constraint, once again, see if you can remember what that is. And most of you figured this out in class, but what is that? So when I say constraint something, once again, constraint something, what is that right there? Okay, so hopefully you remember that once again, at least in this particular version of SQL, that's just the name of the constraint. It's something that you don't always have to have. So we wouldn't necessarily have to give our primary key column an actual, or this constraint for that primary key, a name for the constraint. But once again, the whole point of it is that if you ever have some error later on that says, once again, if we go to delete this row from the table up here, we get this error in our database that says, error, can't do that. If we didn't have any more information, we'd say, why not? But if we have something that pops up that says, that's the error message, then we can go look and say, oh, that's that's what the problem is. It's that particular constraint right there that's limiting us. Okay, and I made these intentionally something that you wouldn't necessarily be able to know from just looking at them what they mean, but a much better name. Instead of saying something like custnum C, I would say something like custnum and then FK, foreign key, to know that that's a foreign key. This one here, same thing, say something like primary key. This one up here, you could say something like required or something that says can't be null. So then, even better, if you have an error message related to something, you can maybe look at that error and say, oh, okay, it's a foreign key constraint. So that's what those things were, just to keep reminding you of